those of us that are entrepreneurs for the long term don't spend most of our time in startup mode, particularly the successful people. They're spending their time in operational mode, working on something that has reached some level of sustainability and just making it better, figuring out ways to work fewer hours and make more money, which is not all that sexy. It's not as appealing as the startup hustle, but that's actually where success lies. And so I focused on, like, what does it take to achieve long-term success? Initially, that was what the podcast was about. And what I kept hearing was focus, discipline, and perseverance are the characteristics that lead you to long-term success.
David Shriner-Cahn's weekly advice program has been named by Forbes as a podcast to power up your ultra lean business. David has also been recognized as an entrepreneur that will change the way you communicate by Inc. magazine. David is the podcast host and community builder behind Smashing the Plateau, an online platform offering resources, accountability, and camaraderie to high-performing professionals who are making the leap from their corporate career track to entrepreneurial business ownership. Starting your own business is hard enough without having to go it alone. Smashing the Plateau is David's solution to the problems that keep entrepreneurs up at night. As he likes to say, with the help of people just like you in our community, you'll be able to do more of what you love and get paid what you're worth. I am so excited to have David join us on Prospecting on Purpose. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's really exciting to be here and an honor.
I'm excited to have you. And since I know we're going to get into a wealth of knowledge because of the community that you serve and the community that you're in, I would be interested to learn from you right out the gate. What is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
This is a piece of advice that I learned from someone who has been my coach on and off for years and whose program was really a game changer for my life. That was, it's about 40 years ago. Yes. And it's about goals versus objectives. And I really and the person who taught me this is Nella Barkley. And the way Nella describes goals, they're something that is specific enough so you know when you're working towards them, yet they're not time bound. They're not bound by metrics. So you're never complete. So it is kind of like your purpose, your vision, what it is you're trying to work towards in your life, in your work. And objectives are measurable, concrete, that you know when you have reached an objective and you're finished with it. So, and the objectives, like you can take your goals and break them down into many objectives, and there will still be more objectives that you can work on. So as an example, like in my case, I'm empowering corporate refugees to do more of what they love and get paid what they're worth so they can support their ideal lifestyle. And there will always be more to do when it comes to that, yet it's specific enough that I know when I'm focused on it and I'm working towards it. But, an example of, so that would be a goal. And an example of an objective would be, I want to grow the Smashing the Plateau community by 25% within the next 12 months, right? It's very concrete, very measurable. And I know whether I hit that target or not.
That's awesome advice, because I feel like the word goals is thrown around a little flippantly these days, and for good reason, because we don't have a lot of conversations around defining what a goal is. And I love the objective is what gives you the time bound and the specificity. So thank you for sharing that with us. Sure. I love it. And I'd love to, let's just dive into, tell us a little bit about Smashing the Plateau, the community.
Okay. So in general, the Smashing the Plateau is all about providing a home for corporate refugees who either want to or are starting, running, and growing their own businesses so that they can do more of what they love, get paid what they're worth, and support their ideal lifestyle. And right now we have 4 elements that are part of what we do. One is the long-running podcast, Smashing the Plateau. That's actually was how we got started in 2014. These are right now weekly episodes of stories and strategies that will inspire you and help you work towards your goals. A newsletter that is daily on weekdays, that's free, and it's very short actionable, inspiring, and practical tips. Sometimes they're like very strategic. Sometimes it's a story about somebody. Every Monday, it's actually a story about the podcast episode that gets released on Mondays. Fridays, we tend to focus more on community. I try to tie it to something that the podcast guest has said to make it kind of relevant to the topic of the week. And then so that's the second, is the newsletters. We have workshops that are periodic, kind of one-shot experiences that will help you work through a challenge. They're one shot. They kind of give you a taste of what it's like to be in our community, but you're basically committing an hour of your time to go through this. And then the community is what we do 24/7 to provide support to our members who are corporate refugees, who are collaborative, innovative, motivated to succeed in their career on their own terms.
Well, I think about my own journey because I have officially been self-employed for a year. And when I think about the biggest, I don't want to use the word the biggest gut punch, but the hardest thing to really get through was, I don't want to use the word losing my team, but that's really was the biggest struggle. Is I loved being part of a team. I loved my colleagues and my coworkers. And now all of a sudden you're a team of one. That I think was the biggest shock to the system. And so I love that you've put together this community. I'm imagining it's because other people have felt the way I just described. Is that kind of the origin story of how you got started?
It's totally the origin story. First of all, it's in addition to being your experience, it's also my experience. I was in the corporate environment for the first 28 years of my career. And then in 2006, I left my last job, started a solo consulting business, and I made the leap with an idea of the kind of business I wanted and what I wanted to do, but I hadn't started anything when I left my job. So it's like I left my job on, for example, I left my job on Friday, and then Monday I opened up my business.
Got it.
Right? No really solid business plan, no clients. It was an idea. And, for many people, they go from the way I describe it is, particularly when you've been in your work for a while, you go from a place where you have a full calendar, an overflowing inbox, team of people to take care of all the things you're not responsible for. You have this built-in social structure, and then you go out on your own. You have an empty calendar, empty inbox, no team, and you're all alone. And then you have to get up and market and sell something that you've never had to market and sell before, which is yourself. And even if you've been in marketing and sales, it's very different selling a company that gives you a paycheck and selling yourself. And so, and I learned early on, I'm somebody who has always been part of communities in my life. Long before I left corporate, I was always involved in different things, both professionally and personally. And it took me a while to sort of find my footing as an entrepreneur and find my entrepreneurial colleagues and friends. But once I did, it was a game changer. And I realized how important that is to being able to make this transition. And so, particularly after running the podcast for so many years and having literally hundreds of conversations with mostly corporate refugees that, tended to be my podcast guests are mostly corporate people who came out of corporate and started their own business. I saw how powerful it is to have a place that where you feel safe to let your hair down, talk a little bit about, celebrate your wins, but also talk about where things are just not working the way you want and what can you do about that, and hear from other people that may have had the same experiences so they can share things that have worked for them, or people that are committed to listening to you and can ask you kind of leading questions that will help you unpack what's really going on and figure out how you can get over whatever plateau you're currently experiencing.
Oh, so that's also the origin story of the name.
Yes. That is the origin story of the name, is the origin story of everything we do.
I think about, it kind of reminds me of, I call them like little camps that you're in your life, right? Like I'm an unmarried person, so I'm in the singles camp, and the married people are in the married camp. But then once the married people have kids, they're in the camp with the kids. And so you go into these different camps. And I've noticed that now I'm in the entrepreneurial camp, and the people that are starting to come into my life, or the people that I'm having conversations with, it is is really interesting. I'm talking to a former CEO for a couple of different startups. He had really high profile jobs. He retired. I'm a little bit farther along in my journey. We have some, what's the word I'm looking for? We have some nice skill sets that overlap and don't compete. So we're talking about approaching a project together. And I'm just thinking, in what world would this person now, he's almost like my coworker. I'm viewing all these little friends as like my new coworkers. And it is really interesting because they're going through the pain that you are, and they're just at a different stage. So some people are ahead of you, some people are behind you, but it is really collaborative to see how open people are to helping. I'm assuming you found that a lot in the community, and that's the purpose of the community, is just people being open to help.
Yes, that kind of ties into some of our community guidelines, which really reflect also who's in the community. But, collaboration is it's a key guideline. It's something that we prize. And I think people that are in the community are very collaborative. Making a space for people to feel comfortable being vulnerable is really important. Not being overly self-promotional is important, because what tends to happen, like you just described a scenario where you're kind of doing this little dance with a colleague where it could potentially be that you end up helping this other person more in terms of their business goals, or maybe they help you more, or maybe you help each other and it's totally like a 50% win-win. But, sometimes it's more one, sometimes it's more the other, but there's this kind of exchange element that is sort of the underpinning of everything that's going on.
Which I have noticed too, people are very, I would say, generous with what they share. Even if it doesn't come back necessarily, like if I contribute more, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's got to give me the 50% back, because it almost feels like somebody else is going to help me 50% more. It's almost like a pay it forward type of environment too, where it's not always, if you're generous with your time and resources, that generosity usually comes back, whether it's in, it may not be tomorrow, it might be a year from now, or maybe a couple of years from now, but it is cool to see how that cycle really, really comes full circle.
Yes, and it comes from unexpected places.
All the time. I think that's what's been my most personal fun part of this, is you just never know who you're going to talk to. So today I'm so excited to talk to you, David, because one of the reasons I was so excited to talk to you is because you have, since 2014, all sorts of entrepreneurs at your fingertips, right? You've been kind of overviewing this community and seeing the struggles, but also the strengths. I would like to get into some of the common themes you see amongst that group of individuals. Can you share some of the common traits that make someone really successful in self-employment and entrepreneurship?
Yeah, well, motivation is a big part of it. So for example, when you're in corporate, your performance is generally judged on how often you get it right. I don't know. I don't know about you, but in my experience, when I was getting performance reviews, there was a lot more emphasis on the small parts of my job that I wasn't hitting the numbers on versus the overwhelming majority that I was doing right. So I would say, like, as an employee, typically, if you're getting more than 10% wrong, you're going to hear about it. Whereas as an entrepreneur, you're constantly putting yourself out there, trying things. You have no idea how well it's going to work, or if it's going to work at all. I feel like it's just the opposite. As an entrepreneur, if you're getting more than 10% right, you're really usually doing really well. So that's like a big difference. And you need to be comfortable with getting it wrong most of the time. And another thing that's helpful when you're getting it wrong most of the time, I mean, that can be kind of a bummer. And so you do need your community to support you when you're going through these constant kind of experiences of negativity, because they come up a lot. So that's one. Another one, we talked a little bit about being collaborative. And I was thinking, as I was preparing for our conversation, I'm thinking about two people in our community that have this really fascinating, unexpected collaboration that has evolved. One person is a consultant, coach, speaker, an author, and another one is someone who is a book consultant and literary agent. And the unexpected collaboration is the book consultant, literary agent is helping the speaker, author with their speaking engagements. And because the agent is really good at supporting thought leaders, because they've worked primarily on nonfiction authors that have written many types of business books, they're helping the speaker raise their profile, increase their fees substantially, and have speaking offerings that are new, that were sort of where they weren't making any money before. So it's been like a win for both of them.
Cool.
And right. And that was like, is totally unexpected. So that's, that's one example of something that can happen with a collaboration. Another trait that is really common, and I already mentioned, vulnerability. So there's one member who, I'm going to say, like several years ago, was really struggling financially, and with primarily peer support, has taken one particular client from a place of month-to-month fees that were very marginal to annual renewing contracts that are about 5 times the price and take less time to deliver.
Wow.
Yeah. And that is totally through the impact of the peers in the community. It's quite remarkable.
Did they just ask for help? Like, how did they get the support? Did they have to, in terms of being vulnerable, did they just say, hey, I'm struggling here financially? And
I'm struggling financially. I have this new client. Here's what I'm working on. Here's what they've asked me to propose. Would you be willing to take a look at this proposal? Right.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
That's being really vulnerable. You're sharing a proposal that you've drafted in confidence with a handful of people, but then they got the feedback. You need to ask for more. And instead of asking for this at a month at a time, why not make it a 12-month contract? Because the client was getting funding on an annual basis, or possibly multiple years at a time of funding. So the client was in a position to be able to handle a 12-month contract. And it's worked out really well.
I think vulnerability needs a place in everyone's roles a little bit more intentionally, because if you crack the door open to be slightly more vulnerable, I feel like other people share their vulnerabilities too. And then the relationships become a lot stronger, so that when it comes to business generating activities, it's a lot easier because you have that foundational relationship.
Yes. Think about what happens in a strong marriage. If the two partners are not really vulnerable with each other, it's not going to be a strong marriage. But when they are really vulnerable and totally open, it can be rock solid.
And then their little baby, that's the business, gets to flourish.
Exactly.
Okay. So we have motivation. You have to be clear on your motivation. You have to be uncomfortable. You have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I really like the 10%. If you're getting 10% right, that's a good thing. I'm going to use that as my new metric. So thank you for that. And then being vulnerable. Any other common traits you see in this group?
Well, being open to unexpected opportunity. I would say that's really important. It's kind of tied to what we talked about already when it comes to collaboration, because these unexpected opportunities then evolve. For example, when I started my business, I came out of the nonprofit sector, and I was a nonprofit management consultant, and I joined a business networking group, and one of the members asked me to help me with his solo business. And I'm like, what do I know about running a solo business? I just started mine. And, I have years of experience, but it's all running these not one person nonprofit organizations. And he says, no, I know you can help. And I'm like, okay. And, that ended up being my first privately held business client. And from there were others. And, eventually this turned into a whole area of expertise around solopreneurship.
Wow.
But again, I wasn't looking for that particular kind of business, but it came towards me, and I was like, oh, I guess this makes sense to pursue.
You have 3 truths to live by. And I feel like this speaks to one of your truths of being a tortoise and building, that first client and then the second client, and being open to going with the flow. Can you talk a little bit about that? What does it mean to be a tortoise? And then let's get into some of the other truths to live by.
Sure. And it also ties into what we talked about with being 10% right. Thomas Edison is credited with bringing the light bulb to market after about 10,000 failed attempts. So imagine the mindset that it takes to test 10,000 light bulbs that don't work before one actually does. And so this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And if you want to be successful as an entrepreneur, you're going to try a lot of things that don't work. And, it's interesting. When I started the podcast, Smashing the Plateau, podcasting was in its infancy compared to where it is now. But if you looked, in 2014, if you looked at the number of business podcasts, there were a lot of podcasts about startups. And those of us that are entrepreneurs for the long term don't spend most of our time in startup mode. We mostly, particularly the successful people, they're spending their time in operational mode. Right? Working on something that has reached some level of sustainability and just making it better, figuring out ways to maybe work fewer hours and make more money, which is not all that sexy. It's not as appealing as the sort of the startup hustle, but that's actually where success lies. And so I focused on like, what does it take to achieve long-term success? And that initially, that was what the podcast was about. And, what I kept hearing was focus, discipline, and perseverance are the characteristics that lead you to long-term success. So to me, that is what the tortoise is all about, whereas the hare is about a quick win. And quick wins are kind of fleeting and they come and go, and they tend not to lead to long-term success or even long-term happiness.
Kind of like weight loss. Like you can do a crash diet and lose, 10 pounds in a couple of weeks. But if you lose 10 pounds with building the right habits and the right strength training, I like that a lot. Focus, discipline. What was the third trait?
Perseverance.
Perseverance. Oh, thank you. Well, and I think what I like about that too is that that personally gives me permission to not measure myself where I'm at in my business too, because I do feel like I'm in the building the machine stage right now, but it's getting to a point where it's pivoting to some of the operations, best practices. How can I do this more intentionally? How can I outsource things? And I've noticed I need a lot of support from different people in my network to help me get the operation stuff really underway.
Yes.
So the other two truths to live by. So be a tortoise is one. What are the other two? I think we've already kind of touched on that.
You can do what you love and get paid what you're worth. We've talked a lot about that. And there are actually some, we have a particular methodology that we use that is kind of the underpinning of that. The other one is building your own business is easier if you don't do it alone. And we've talked a lot about that too.
I love it. Well, it's such a great piece. And I think with all of these, being uncomfortable, being vulnerable, having your own motivation, I think that kind of ties to an overarching thread of just having the right mindset to do it, because you're going to come up upon 90% failure. So I would be interested from you when that happens, like, do you have suggestions on how to stay motivated when times are tough?
Well, you're not going to be surprised by my answer, but it's community. And there are three kinds of experiences that I think you need to be engaged in regularly: large group activities where you're connecting with a large group of people and you're putting yourself out there. It's going to mean being vulnerable. For example, in our platform, we have a place where you can ask your community. And when people pose a question and they look for support and they're looking for feedback and help, they will get it. And if you post it in the platform, everybody's going to see it. So that's a large group experience. Mm-hmm. Small group is being with I'm going to say probably fewer than a dozen people on a regular basis. So, for example, we have an accountability program where we match people up in a small group. Our groups are about 6 to 8 each, which means, and they meet monthly. They meet monthly and they have a space where they can communicate in between the monthly sessions. But again, that's a way to engage with a small number of people that are going to get to know you well. You'll get to know them well. I'm in another community where I run a weekly mastermind. That is, even though the community is pretty big and there's no way I can get to know everybody in the community, but in the mastermind that has, we have about 10 people, we've developed some really nice relationships and supporting one another. And our community, we also have private guidance groups that are generally up to 6 people each that meet weekly. Same purpose. So connect with a small group on a regular basis. It'll be kind of an anchor. And the other one is one-to-one. You and I talked about this earlier. And it's not just like, I have a lot of different one-to-one relationships that I maintain in different ways. So for example, I have a handful of people that I will text every Friday.
Oh, I like that.
Either I text them or they text me. And it's like, I know if I have gone through a Friday and I haven't heard from somebody, I'll start to worry, are they okay? And we have a program in our community where we will make introductions between 2 members of the community to kind of foster this one-to-one relationship building. And that's really important.
And it's nice because I feel like that type of relationship is different. Obviously, it's different from a client consultant relationship too. And I think that you really do need those types of structures. I love that you boil it down to large group, small group, and one-on-one. I think I'm just thinking about my own business. I've unofficially done that in some form factor, but I like the idea of having it structured with people that know your specific struggles, because then you're able to speak to what you need in that moment versus, I have a couple of former clients. They all started their own interior design business. So we get together once once a quarter for dinner, and we call it, entrepreneur dinner, and we share our wins and then we share our goals. And we've been pretty good at keeping it up, but it is unofficial and we're not necessarily in the same space. So it's different things. So I like the idea of being aligned a little bit more strategically with people who are in business similar to yours. So I just had a question on the group. Okay, so all of this community is it's people in similar business situations. I would be interested, because this is a sales and business development focused podcast, is prospecting on purpose. Do you see certain areas where entrepreneurs get stuck in their prospecting efforts?
Yeah, particularly corporate refugees.
Interesting.
And I love this question. I'm glad you sent me the questions in advance so I could think about them.
Yeah.
One is that you need to focus on what you can control. Because too often we get overwhelmed and stressed by things we can't control. That's a big one.
Can you give an example? I didn't mean to put you on the spot
So I can get stressed about the size of my podcast audience, or I can get stressed about how many impressions I get on a LinkedIn post. I have no control over that. I can control what I write. Right? I can control what I write. If I think what I write is helpful to my audience, okay. If I get actual concrete feedback from somebody that I can work on, that's great. But if it's just something that is kind of a vanity metric that I have no control over, it's like, what's the point of getting stressed over that? And honestly, it doesn't drive my business metrics or anything else. So that's one. And I would say another one is being able to delegate. Too many people are reluctant to delegate.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm in that piece where I'm starting to delegate and outsource things, and it's a little nerve-wracking because you don't know if they're going to do it in the way that you want it done, and that's the whole point of delegating. But I can see where it's a roadblock for people.
Right. Another one, and this is one that I have seen a lot, is that consultants undercharge way too often. They think that price is going to be the major decision factor, and it often isn't. I mean, sometimes it is, but very often it's not. I think you need to be really clear on what value you bring to the table and what value you're going to provide to the client, and price accordingly. I've also seen, especially with early stage consultants, they're generally too broad in what they offer. Right. They're afraid to go narrow because they think they're leaving money on the table. And I know it's marketing 101 to go narrow, but consultants have a really hard time with that, because as an employee, you're paid well to solve complex, non-repeatable problems. As a business owner, you get paid well to solve problems that may seem complex to your clients. That's why they hire you. But the simpler they are for you and the easier it is for you to repeat the process, the more profitable it is.
Okay. Now I feel like you're speaking right into my soul, David, and what both my problems are. I mean, I feel like, I'm thinking about some of my first proposals in my business, and they were coming to me with big problems, and I knew I could solve it in something that would result in millions of dollars. It was a big ROI, but I do think that I wasn't clear on explaining the value. And one area that I personally am getting much better at, but I struggled with at the beginning, and maybe it's because I'm a corporate refugee, is the balance of how much do you share up front to prove that you know what you're talking about, but not enough where, this is the stuff people pay me for. Like, that seems to me a delicate dance.
Yeah, you can share the what, just not the how. Because they're going to hire you because they can't do the how, or they don't want to do the how.
Share the what, not the how.
So I find that the more you share about what is the outcome they can get and what do they need to do to get that outcome, but not the how.
Got it. Okay.
And honestly, I struggled with this when it came to starting my own community. And I was thinking, okay, who is it actually going to be for? And it took me a while to actually really define the ideal community member. And, by saying corporate refugees, I'm eliminating a lot of potential business in theory. There are lots of business owners who would benefit by community, but the experience of going from corporate to your own business and typically our members have had a substantial amount of corporate experience. It varies. Some are on the lower end, but and some of them have been corporate. We have a member who was a few members that are like 40 plus years in corporate and then went out on their own. I would say one extreme
Yeah.
most people are like more in the middle, but we've, created a very clear niche. And also I struggled with, how do we price this? Because if you look at community models, they're all over the map. From free, and there are communities that are $19 a month, and I kind of wonder, what can you provide for $19 a month and be profitable? And then there are communities that are like thousands of dollars a month, and for an online community for corporate refugees, thousands of dollars a month to me seems a little high. But we settled at we're currently at $197 a month, which seems like it's a fair price for something where I think we provide a lot of value.
Yeah.
But it's not right. But it's not. It's not an inconsequential amount, which also means that for people that are going to join, even though there's no long-term commitment, we actually even offer a 30-day money-back guarantee. You're not going to commit to $197 a month unless you're going to do some work.
Right. There's skin in the game. Yeah.
There's skin in the game. And the reality is you're not going to be successful unless you do the work.
Well, I think one of the things that I really struggled with is external accountability, because when you work for a corporation, you have metrics, you have sales goals, you have a boss. There's like that, there's a structure that's inherent as part of your role. And then all of a sudden it's like, I could do whatever I want with my days. What am I going to focus on? Like that. That's why I personally enjoy coaching and accountability partners, because you need that to meet your objectives, not your goals, your objectives.
Right.
But to get to the goal. And I do think, I think it's great that you're providing this platform for people to build community, because one thing that I hear a lot in prospecting in particular, I would always joke that being in sales for me, it was like being paid to make friends. Building relationships comes really naturally to me. And some of the feedback that I get from this podcast is I'm giving individuals some tools if it doesn't come naturally to them. And what's nice about a membership program and community is you have this machine to build these networks and these connections, and people don't have to do it themselves, because I think people struggle to build relationships.
As a matter of fact, like we've categorized the kind of the takeaways from many of our podcasts, and they tend to fall into 4 categories. Relationships is one, mindset is another one, a business development is an obvious one, and productivity is a big issue.
Okay, so relationships, mindset,
business development, and productivity.
Well, I like to think that I'm working on the top 3, but productivity is something that I really could use some support with too. So let's talk about mindset a little bit too, because I would be interested. When I went through the pandemic quarantine, I think that's where I built a lot of the habits and the tools and the mindset that enabled me to be brave enough to take the leap. I don't think I had those qualities before the pandemic. So I look at that time as a blessing for me to really get strong in my mind and faith in myself. But it took a lot of work, and it takes work every day. So I would be curious, how does mindset and mindfulness come up in your own personal business and then the community at large?
Well, I try to have a positive mindset. And so I start my day by writing something that I've experienced the day before that can lead to at least a positive mindset to get me started for the day. And then I will meditate for about 10 minutes and do a very short amount of physical exercise. I find that structure kind of gets me going with as positive a mindset as possible.
Oh, that's very similar to my mornings. I get the coffee, I write the gratitude journal, but it's usually just a recap of the wins from the day before. And I have noticed if I don't do that, my days are a little bit grumpier. But if you start it out with positivity, may I ask, you don't have to share if you don't want to, but do you use an app to meditate, or have you been doing it long enough? Can you tell us a little bit about your 10-minute meditation?
I do use an app. And by the way, the meditation is something that I've started within the last year. So the meditation piece is something new, but I find it's really helpful. Yes, I do have I use an app, and it is called, find it really quickly, 10%.
10%? Oh, I haven't heard of that one. Okay. Thank you. I just did an episode about an introduction to meditation, because I do think that has been a really big game changer in my own personal life. And it's something that I've had to just make it a practice, and it's not hard. I just do it in my bed. It's easy. But as I was preparing for this interview, I was like, I want to ask David if he meditates, but I don't know if that's an appropriate question to ask someone without a heads up. So thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that, because I mean, can you share like how much, what impact it's had on you since you've started for the past year?
I haven't missed a day since I started doing it.
Oh, that's a good one. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I just find that I start the day more relaxed.
Okay. I like that. Because if you take that little bit of time, then the rest of your day becomes so much more productive. And what I see is we all jump in, we wake up, we go to our phones, we look at our email, and then all of a sudden your day is off at a potential negative start if there's an email in there you don't like. But if you could take just a little bit of time for yourself, I feel like the rest of those hours working are a little bit more positive.
So here's the thing about email and looking at your phone and all that. It's when you look at email and you look at whatever is on your phone, it's reactive. So it's almost inevitable that it's going to, there'll be something that all of a sudden is added to your already big to-do list that was unplanned. So how can it not cause some stress? Whereas if you journal and you meditate and you do some exercise, those are all proactive that you have control over.
Oh, I love that. Okay. So proactivity to start your day is going to lead to a more positive outlook, which is a more positive mindset, which leads to easier way of handling stress and working on your goals and objectives.
Yes. And I can tell you, I've interviewed many guests that have the practice of having one big thing that is important for the long-term success of their business that they are going to do for the first chunk of time during the day before they will look at email or open their phone or look or listen or watch the news or read the news. And for some people, they'll say they'll take 2 hours to work on something first before doing anything else. I wish I had that level of discipline and control and I could shut out the world for the first 2 hours of my day. Either I'd be getting up at 3 a.m. or I would just have a lot of control and not let other stuff sort of impose their own to-do lists on mine. I'm not that good.
I hear that a lot too. And I've always been in the Pacific time zone, and the world is halfway through their day already by the time you're looking at your laptop. So it is hard to chunk down the first 2 hours. So I'm right there with you, but I like that that's a common thing. Have you seen any other kind of common tips like that through the guests that you've interviewed?
Well, it's kind of like what we just talked about, which is the ones. So here's the thing. When you're an employee, your time is structured by somebody else's agenda. That's why they pay you. That's why they pay you every payday. As an entrepreneur, particularly if you're coming out of corporate, there's this idea of freedom that I can do whatever I want with my time. And yes, you can do whatever you want with your time, but the more structured you are on focusing on what's going to provide the biggest impact and when to do the different pieces, the more successful you're going to be and probably the more fulfilled and happier you'll be. So it's really about finding the structure that works for you. And like I always struggled with somebody else imposing structure. I mean, I was never really good at it. My kids make fun of me. Daddy always says rules are meant to be broken. Yet here I am in my own business. I'm the one who sets the rules. So am I setting rules for other people to break them? I don't know. But for me, it's really about having control over what I do with my time and when. It's not about not being structured and not being controlled about what I do and not being disciplined, but it's about having the agency to do it my way.
I like that a lot. And I think that giving yourself structure is what's going to lead to the ultimate success. And if the ultimate success is measured by your freedom, your joy and happiness and fulfillment in your career, and then ideally the income and getting paid what you're worth. I think that that's such a great thing that you're shepherding into the world. And I know that your community is grateful to have you. We'll link up all of the Smashing the Plateau in the show notes. But David, before we wrap, I'd like to ask first if there's anything else you'd like to share, and then I'll end it with where people can find you in the show.
Sure. So I mentioned that our podcasts have fallen into these 4 categories: mindset, business development, relationships, and productivity. We've actually distilled about 99 episodes into these 4 categories with I ask each guest a bonus question that's not part of the podcast episode. I ask them, what's your most actionable tip to improve and I asked them to pick one of those 4 categories and answer the question. So these are really short. They're generally like 1 to 3 sentences in the answer. And so we've taken these and put them into an ebook with a link to the episode. And that's available. We created a special link for your show.
I saw that. So we'll put it in the show notes. That was so cool.
Yes. And I sent you the link, but now I don't remember what it is. smashingtheplateau.com/ name of your podcast is?
Prospecting on purpose.
That's it. So
Cool.
yeah, so smashingtheplateau.com/prospecting on purpose.
And
All
so
one word.
now I think that's such a great idea. Can I ask you that question right back at you?
Oh,
Were you ready for that? What's one of the most actionable tips when it comes to mindset, business development, relationships, or productivity?
yeah, when you're in a conversation with a prospect, listen. It's common to think about what is the problem that they're discussing with you right now. Think about how this may be a recurring problem that will lead you to a recurring relationship with them that will lead to recurring revenue for your business. And of course, recurring solutions for your client.
Oh, that's great. And I think that applies to a lot of different people too. If you're in a corporate role and you're talking to a client, it's the same concept. It's the
Same
active
concept.
listening. Oh, that's a great one. Okay. Thank you so much for that, David. Anything else you'd like to add before we wrap?
No, I think we're good. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, I appreciate your time. I will link everything up in the show notes. I can't wait to get into Smashing the Plateau. It seems like something that is long overdue for the community. And I love that you've been doing it for so long. So I appreciate your time and expertise on the show.
Thanks, Sarah.